The morning fog lingered over the streets of Boston, draping the city in a soft, gray haze as the world slowly stirred awake. But inside La Maison d'Oz, our cozy bakery on Newbury Street, my day had already begun. As I worked the rolling pin over a sheet of pie dough, I stole a glance out the window. Pedestrians moved with increasing urgency, their brisk strides a clear sign that Thanksgiving was just around the corner. "Mom, look, I did it." I turned at the sound of my son's voice to find Noah standing proudly behind me, holding up a cupcake he had just decorated. His small hands had somehow managed the delicate work of a seasoned baker, an impressive feat for an 8-year-old. "That's amazing, Noah," I said, ruffling his hair with a smile. Saturday mornings were our sacred time together, just the two of us baking in the kitchen. Meanwhile, my husband Ethan had left early, again, off to meet clients. As the sales director for Caldwell Enterprises, his job never took a holiday. A large portion of the company's revenue depended on him, and he never let anyone forget it. "Hannah, the croissants today? Absolute perfection." Jennifer, one of my staff members, poked her head into the kitchen, beaming. She barely finished her sentence before disappearing back into the front of the shop, where the morning crowd had already devoured over half of today's batch. Since our feature in the Boston Globe's notable bakeries section, customers had been lining up before dawn, eager to get their hands on our famous pastries. It still felt surreal sometimes, this life I had built. Growing up in Boston's South End, raised by a single mother with barely enough to get by, success had always seemed like something reserved for other people. But I had clawed my way here, through long nights of studying on a scholarship to pastry school, through endless hours in the kitchens of luxury hotels, through every challenge that stood between me and my dream of owning my own shop. And now, here I was. Noah, too, had inherited my love for baking. Every afternoon when he got home from school, he made a beeline for the kitchen, setting up his homework on the counter so he could help in between assignments. At a recent parent-teacher conference, he had proudly declared during his Future Dreams presentation that he wanted to be a pastry chef, just like Mom. His teacher called him a kind, thoughtful child, someone who brought people together. Ethan's career, on the other hand, was flourishing in a different way. Just last week, he had closed a major real estate development deal, a transaction big enough to put his company well ahead of its annual targets. His ability to lead his team while relentlessly chasing new business opportunities had made him a respected name both inside and outside Caldwell Enterprises. But not everyone had celebrated our successes. I could still hear my mother-in-law Eleanor's words, sharp as ever, the day Ethan told her we were engaged. "Marrying someone like her is a disgrace to our family." To a woman like Eleanor, wife of the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, a fixture in Boston's elite social circles, her son marrying a girl from a low-income neighborhood was nothing short of scandalous. She attended our wedding, but only in body, never in spirit. And her opinion hadn't changed, not even when Noah was born. While she showered her other grandchildren with affection, she remained cold to him, distant. At society events, she would act as though we didn't exist, forcing everyone else into an uncomfortable silence. Recently, her resentment had become even more blatant. She hadn't even bothered to show up at Noah's birthday party last month, despite receiving an invitation. Later, when he ran into her by chance, she dismissed him with a cruel remark. "Expensive gifts don't suit a child with a mother from the slums." I could still picture the hurt on Noah's face. The memory alone was enough to make my stomach turn. Then, just yesterday, an invitation arrived. The Caldwell family's annual Thanksgiving dinner. Every year, this invitation brought a wave of tension into our home. "You don't have to go," Ethan had said. But Noah, with his ever-hopeful heart, had looked up at me during dinner and said, "I want to get along with Grandma." His eyes shone with so much optimism, so much innocence, that I couldn't bring myself to say no. "We'll go," I decided. Ethan looked unsure but didn't argue. He knew what this meant to our son. Thanksgiving morning arrived with an unforgiving chill in the air. In Chestnut Hill, where the Caldwell estate stood, the streets were already alive with the holiday bustle. Elegantly dressed people hurried through town, while the last of the autumn leaves swirled through the air, painting the neighborhood in warm shades of red and gold. Before we left, I spent the morning baking an apple pie. It wasn't for Eleanor, heaven knew she wouldn't appreciate it, but for myself. My pride wouldn't allow me to show up empty-handed. "Mom, is my tie straight?" Noah, perched in the back seat, anxiously adjusted the navy tie I had picked out to match his new suit. A small silver pin gleamed against the fabric, a tiny detail that made him look so grown up. Perfect, I assured him, catching his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face held a mixture of nerves and excitement, hope and hesitation. Beside me, Ethan was quiet, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the Caldwell mansion was already surrounded by an impressive lineup of luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Mercedes, and a Rolls-Royce gleaming under the winter sun. The house itself was just as intimidating. A towering Victorian masterpiece, its red brick facade and arched windows exuded a kind of untouchable grandeur. The front garden, manicured to perfection, stood as a testament to a family with generations of wealth and power. The moment we stepped inside, a wave of warmth and the unmistakable scent of roasting turkey enveloped us. And with that, Thanksgiving had officially begun. The grand hall shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, already bustling with relatives engaged in polite conversation. The women floated through the room in elegant designer gowns, while the men stood in tailored suits, exchanging pleasantries. I glanced down at my blouse, a simple piece from a boutique, and felt instantly out of place. Ethan, Hannah, so glad you could make it. James, my father-in-law, greeted us warmly, his usual gentle nature shining through. As chairman of Caldwell Enterprises, he carried himself with quiet dignity, his gray suit reflecting both his authority and his easygoing temperament. Noah, my boy, you're getting taller every time I see you, James said, resting a kind hand on his grandson's head. The gathered relatives smiled at the exchange, their reactions natural and effortless. Seeing familiar faces, Noah slowly started to relax, the tension in his small shoulders easing as he spotted his cousins. Within moments, he was drawn into a lively group of 8-year-olds, his laughter blending with theirs. At first, everything seemed perfectly civilized. Maids moved swiftly through the room, setting the long dining table with heirloom silverware, each polished piece a relic of the Caldwell family's long-standing prestige. The table itself was a masterpiece, delicate white china arranged meticulously, crystal glasses catching the candlelight. Soft, flickering flames burned in antique holders, casting a golden glow against the pristine white tablecloth. At the center of it all sat an enormous turkey, roasted to perfection. Surrounding it was a feast of Thanksgiving classics: ruby red cranberry sauce, creamy mashed potatoes, crisp green bean casserole, and decadent sweet potato gratin. On the dessert cart, my apple pie rested beside an array of traditional holiday sweets, each dish a silent testament to the effort behind this gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. James, the butler, spoke with practiced authority, prompting the 20 or so family members to gather around the grand dining table. Uncles, aunts, cousins, relatives who lived separate lives most of the year but came together for this annual ritual. Then came the sound of high heels clicking against the staircase. Eleanor made her entrance, descending in an emerald green dress that shimmered under the chandeliers, a diamond necklace gleaming at her throat. She wore a smile, but it was calculated, practiced. And beneath it, I sensed something colder, something sharper. "Hannah, what a lovely blouse," she said smoothly. I held her gaze, offering nothing more than a slight nod. Years of experience had trained me to recognize the barbed edges hidden within her compliments. Behind her, a few maids hesitated ever so slightly, their eyes flickering toward me before they continued their work. As everyone settled into their assigned seats, James and Eleanor took their usual places at the head of the table, surrounded by the eldest relatives. Ethan and I were directed toward the middle, Noah's seat right beside mine. And then, I saw it. The blood in my veins turned to ice. In front of Noah's seat, where a silver service plate should have been, sat a stainless steel dog bowl. The metal gleamed under the candlelight, its contents unmistakable: brown kibble. Carved into the edge was a single, humiliating word: puppy. The room fell into an unnatural silence. A sharp inhale. A cough from an uncle. A small gasp from a cousin. An elderly aunt turned away, unwilling to look, while another cousin fixed her gaze firmly on the table. Beside me, Noah's small hand gripped my sleeve, his fingers ice-cold, trembling. Ethan's voice, thick with barely contained fury, shattered the stillness. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor lifted her wine glass with practiced elegance, her voice cutting through the room with deliberate slowness. "Why would a child of slum-raised parents need fine dining?" A thin smile curved her lips, her perfectly poised expression belying the cruelty beneath her words. The air in the room thickened. James let out a violent cough. A maid lost her grip on a glass, the sound of shattering crystal ringing through the silence. Noah's lip quivered, his young eyes swimming with unspoken hurt, desperate to hold back the tears threatening to spill. Something inside me shifted, subtle, yet absolute. I rose to my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. The chandeliers above cast long shadows across the table, flickering light bouncing off polished silver. I reached for my son's hand, his small fingers still ice-cold in mine. But as I squeezed, I felt a faint pressure in return, a silent understanding. Without a word, we turned away. Behind us, Ethan stood as well, his breathing heavy with suppressed rage. Our footsteps echoed across the marble floor, cutting through the oppressive silence as we moved toward the entrance. The moment I pushed open the front door, the night air rushed in, crisp and cold against our faces. Gently, I helped Noah into the back seat, his small frame still shaking. Inside the house, chaos erupted. Voices clashed, an aunt's sharp criticism, hushed murmurs from younger cousins, James's furious shouts. But no one followed us. No one tried to stop us. From the second-floor windows, faces peered out from behind lace curtains, watching as we stepped into the car. Their expressions unreadable, their curiosity palpable. The only sound as we drove away was the steady hum of the engine, cutting through the heavy quiet of the night. Noah remained silent in the back seat, his small frame still shivering. The passing streetlights cast fleeting glimpses of his reflection in the window, tired, drained, his youthful excitement drained away. Even after stepping inside our warm home, the weight of what had happened lingered, a cold shadow stretching across the walls. The living room, usually a haven of comfort, now felt oddly unfamiliar under the glow of its soft lighting. I knelt beside Noah, wrapping a comforting arm around his shoulders. "Let's get you into a warm bath, sweetheart." He gave a small nod, still too shaken to speak. As I helped him out of his suit, my heart clenched. His small back trembled under my hands, the fabric of his clothes holding on to the tension and excitement that had, just hours ago, filled him with hope. That hope had been stolen tonight. And as I watched my son struggle to process what had happened, I made a silent vow. This would not go unanswered. As I sat by the bathtub, the warm steam filling the small space, my mind replayed the night's events over and over. Why? Why had she needed to be so cruel, to an innocent child, no less? Gently, I ran a washcloth over Noah's back, his small frame unusually still. Normally, bath time was filled with chatter, him rambling about school, his favorite books, or the latest baking experiment he wanted to try. But tonight, he remained silent. And that silence hurt more than anything. By the time we left the bathroom, wrapped in the warmth of fresh pajamas, he seemed a little calmer. I knelt before him as he perched on the bed, carefully drying his damp hair, watching his expression for any sign of what he was feeling. Then, in a whisper so quiet I almost missed it, he said, "I'm sorry, Mom." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled him into my arms, my voice firm. "You've done nothing wrong." That was all it took. His small body shuddered as the emotions he had been holding in finally broke free. He clung to me as sobs racked through him, warm tears soaking into my shirt. "I just wanted to get along with Grandma," he cried. I ran my hand gently over his back, holding him, grounding him, feeling his little heart slowly steadying under my touch. I wanted to give him words of comfort, to tell him something that would take the pain away, but nothing felt like enough. So I just held him, hoping my presence alone could reassure him. After a while, his sobs faded into soft sniffles. He wiped at his face, looking up at me. "Your pastries are the best, Mom." I couldn't help but smile, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "That's because I make them with love." His lips twitched into a small, tired smile as I settled beside him and picked up his favorite bedtime story. The familiar words, the gentle rhythm, slowly lulled him to sleep. His breathing evened out, though traces of dried tears still clung to his cheeks. I leaned down, pressing a light kiss to his forehead, and as I turned to leave, I heard a quiet murmur escape his lips. "Mom." I clenched my fists, my heart tightening with something fierce and unwavering. No matter what, I would protect this child. That much, I knew with absolute certainty. Stepping into the living room, I found Ethan sitting on the couch, his back tense, his fingers wrapped tightly around his phone. The glow of the screen reflected in his darkened expression, an anger I had never seen in him before. I will never forgive that woman, he muttered, his voice dangerously low. His grip on the phone tightened, knuckles turning white. Scattered across the coffee table were company documents, some crumpled, others hastily flipped through, as if he had been searching for something, anything, to focus his rage on. Ethan, I started, but before I could say more, he stood abruptly, dialing a number without hesitation. I didn't stop him. The confrontation was inevitable. The dial tone rang out, unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Why, Mother? His voice was sharp, controlled but brimming with fury. Why did you do this? From the other end, Eleanor's voice came through, tinny and distant, her tone a mix of excuses and defiance. Even now, she held on to her arrogance. You thought it was a joke. Ethan's voice rose, his anger spilling over. How can you possibly dismiss humiliating an 8-year-old child as a joke? The veins in his neck stood out, his jaw tight. Listen carefully, he said, his voice unwavering. This ends tonight. Our relationship with you? Over. And as of tomorrow, I'm resigning from Caldwell Enterprises. You will never control us again. A stunned silence stretched between them. Then Eleanor's voice turned frantic, but before she could get another word in, Ethan hung up. His hands still trembled slightly as he exhaled a deep breath, his shoulders heaving. Then he turned to me, eyes filled with exhaustion but also something else, determination. I'm sorry, Hannah, for putting you and our son through this. I reached for his hand, repeating the very words I had spoken to Noah only an hour ago. You've done nothing wrong. His fingers curled tightly around mine, gripping like a man clinging to solid ground after nearly drowning. That night, Ethan barely slept. One call after another, he worked late into the night, explaining the situation to his most trusted employees. To my surprise, he wasn't alone in his frustration. Many of his colleagues had long harbored resentment toward Eleanor's cutthroat leadership. Mr. Caldwell, I'm with you, came Daniel Harper's steady voice, a veteran of the sales department. I'm resigning too. Let's build something better. Young Olivia Tran here, another voice chimed in. Count me in. I've had enough of her favoritism and backstabbing. More calls, more messages. And one by one, people began choosing Ethan over the company his mother controlled. Even clients, the lifeline of any business, were quick to pledge their loyalty to him. Ethan, said the CEO of the Harrington Group, one of Boston's largest developers, we trust you. If you're leaving Caldwell Enterprises, we're coming with you. Slowly, the pieces of a new future started to fall into place. By morning, Caldwell Enterprises was already feeling the shift. News of Ethan's resignation spread like wildfire through the headquarters. Panic took root as employee after employee submitted their resignations, many of them following him to his new company. We're about to lose our entire sales department, a desperate report came from Human Resources. Major clients are already requesting to renegotiate their contracts, finance warned. Eleanor's empire was beginning to crack. And Ethan? He was already looking ahead. Within days, his new company, Ethan Caldwell Associates, was rapidly taking shape. A sleek office space in Boston's financial district was secured. Funding poured in from multiple investors eager to back him. Meetings with legal teams, IT specialists, and department heads filled his days as he built a business from the ground up. And then, on one quiet morning, just as things were finally falling into place, bang, bang, bang. A fist pounded against the front door. Hannah, open up. Eleanor's voice rang through the entryway, sharp and panicked. She wasn't using the intercom. She wasn't calling from the comfort of her penthouse. She was here. And for the first time, I heard something in her voice that had never been there before. Desperation. Eleanor's shouting echoed through the quiet neighborhood, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I glanced through the small gap in the curtains and saw her luxury car parked haphazardly by the curb, its door left slightly ajar, as if she had stormed out in a hurry. Slowly, I opened the door. The woman standing before me was barely recognizable. Her meticulously curated image, the polished CEO, the poised socialite, had completely unraveled. Her designer suit was crumpled, her normally impeccable makeup smudged. She clutched her expensive handbag in one hand, waving it wildly, her face contorted with a strange mix of fury and desperation. Why did you seduce my son and destroy our family? She spat. The accusation was so absurd, so misplaced, that for a moment, I simply stared at her. I had seen Eleanor angry before, cold, calculated anger designed to wound with precision. But this was different. This was raw, panicked. I met her gaze evenly. Think carefully about who really destroyed this family, I said, my voice calm but firm. From upstairs, I heard movement. Noah must have woken up. His small footsteps thumped against the floor. You treated your own grandson like a dog, I continued. Is that what family does? Silence. For the first time, Eleanor had no immediate retort. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Then, from behind me, another voice cut through the morning air. That's enough, Mother. Ethan. He stepped forward, placing himself between us. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, but his voice carried a weight of finality. Leave, he said. Don't ever show yourself to us again. Eleanor looked at her son as though seeing him for the first time. For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes, regret, perhaps. A fleeting moment of realization. But it disappeared just as quickly, buried beneath layers of ingrained arrogance. I have my pride, too, she said, her voice trembling slightly. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked back to her car. We stood motionless, watching as she climbed into the driver's seat. Even from a distance, I could see the way her shoulders sagged. The air of superiority she once carried so effortlessly was gone. The car door shut with a dull thud, a sound that felt less like an ending and more like the quiet announcement of something new. Noah appeared beside us, taking my hand in one of his and reaching for Ethan's with the other. His grip was small but firm. In his touch, I felt it, the first threads of a new beginning. A week after Ethan's resignation, Caldwell Enterprises was barely recognizable. The once bustling office, once filled with energy and ambition, had turned into something else entirely, a hollow shell. A suffocating silence hung over the floors where employees once hustled to close deals and pitch new projects. At the latest board meeting, the finance director, Mr. Whitman, sat stiffly at the table, flipping through a thick stack of reports. His face was pale. Over half of our major clients have requested contract reviews, he reported, his voice unsteady. This quarter's sales forecast is down 40% from last year. The numbers in red ink told the full story. The company was bleeding. The real estate development division has taken the hardest hit, Mr. Whitman continued. New project orders have slowed to almost nothing. And that wasn't the worst of it. The sales department has a turnover rate of over 70%, HR chimed in grimly. Most of the remaining employees are actively job hunting, and recent graduates are rejecting their offers outright. Next year's hiring plan is in shambles. The slow exodus had become a full-blown crisis. Ethan's departure had set off a chain reaction, one that Eleanor had failed to anticipate. Employees weren't just leaving, they were leaving in droves. And they weren't going quietly. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her usual commanding presence dimmed. The weariness was starting to show, creeping past the layers of foundation she used to conceal it. She opened her mouth, no doubt to argue, to deflect blame as she always did, but this time, her voice lacked its usual force. Then, the legal director delivered the final blow. We've received a formal request from institutional investors to hold an emergency shareholders meeting, he announced. Silence fell over the room. The agenda, he continued, includes a discussion on management restructuring. The board members stiffened. Eleanor gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. The pressure from shareholders was growing by the day. The company's stock price had plummeted, breaking record lows. In just 1 week, Caldwell Enterprises had lost 30% of its market value. And then, bang! The conference room doors burst open. James stormed inside, a newspaper clenched tightly in his fist. The front page headline was splashed in bold letters. Caldwell Enterprises CEO suspected of misappropriating company assets. The Boston Globe had dedicated 3 entire pages to the scandal. Eleanor's face was frozen in shock as James slammed the paper onto the table. The article detailed her financial misconduct in brutal detail, every lavish expense she had hidden under the company's accounts, every unethical decision she had made. The company's private jet, used for personal shopping trips, $500,000 in charges. The $2 million renovation of her Chestnut Hill mansion, disguised as company expenses. And then there was more. Discriminatory hiring practices. Opaque promotion policies. Harassment of minority employees. Intimidation of female staff. A culture of corruption laid bare for the world to see. The final paragraph sealed her fate. The Securities and Exchange Commission had officially launched an investigation. And it wasn't just anonymous allegations, whistleblowers had come forward with receipts, emails, documents. Employees who had suffered under her reign were speaking out, their testimonies pouring into anonymous hotlines by the hour. These were legitimate management decisions, Eleanor tried, but her voice was barely above a whisper now. Even in her tailored designer suit, she no longer looked like a woman in power. James straightened, his face grave. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and firm. "You will step down as CEO." Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. Then, his next words landed like a hammer blow. "No, more than that. You will leave management entirely. Enough is enough. We cannot allow you to tarnish this company any further." Eleanor's lips parted slightly, as if she might argue. But there was nothing left to say. Because this time, no one was on her side. For a man known for his patience, James's tone left no room for negotiation. His normally mild expression was now set with firm resolve, his gaze reflecting both years of regret and a newfound determination. "Clear out your office immediately." Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't even look at him. Flanked by security staff, she silently began gathering her belongings, her movements slow and mechanical. The woman who once ruled Caldwell Enterprises with an iron grip now looked small. Just another weary, middle-aged executive packing up her career. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed files into her outrageously expensive Birkin bag, one of many luxuries she had charged to the company over the years. But now, there were no assistants to carry it for her, no board members scrambling to appease her. Her reign was over. The following day, Caldwell Enterprises headquarters was filled with tension. Employees crowded into the large hall, their faces a mix of anxiety and anticipation. For years, they had worked under Eleanor's rule, some benefiting, many suffering. Now, change was inevitable. But what kind of change? The murmurs died down as James took the stage, standing tall under the bright lights. His voice rang clear through the silent room. "Effective immediately, I am assuming full authority over Caldwell Enterprises." A heavy stillness settled over the crowd. "We will completely overhaul the way this company operates. Discriminatory policies will be eliminated. We will build a system that evaluates employees fairly, based on merit, not background, not connections." The words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity. "To achieve this, we will immediately implement transparency in promotions, revise the compensation system, and establish a diversity and inclusion committee." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a small ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, then growing. James exhaled deeply, as if shedding the weight of years of misplaced trust. He continued, his tone softer now. "I want to offer my sincerest apology to my son Ethan." A murmur spread through the hall. "My failure to properly supervise this company, to properly supervise my own family, has caused deep wounds. Wounds that I cannot undo. But what I can do is ensure that from this moment on, Caldwell Enterprises becomes the company it was meant to be. One built on fairness, respect, and integrity." A hush fell over the room, but this time, it wasn't from uncertainty. It was from something deeper. Hope. For the first time in years, employees began to believe that real change was possible. The market responded just as swiftly. Within days, Caldwell Enterprises' stock price, which had been in freefall, began to recover, climbing 15% from its lowest point. Business partners who had distanced themselves from Eleanor's leadership started reaching out, signaling a willingness to renegotiate contracts. Internally, the transformation was already in motion. Discriminatory evaluation systems were being rewritten. Childcare and eldercare support programs were expanded. Hiring practices were restructured to ensure inclusivity. Industry papers took notice, covering the company's rapid turnaround with surprising optimism. Caldwell Enterprises was no longer the same company it had been under Eleanor's rule. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell Associates was thriving. In just a month, the company had already secured several major projects. At the morning briefing, Daniel Harper, once Ethan's most trusted subordinate, now his right-hand man, stood before the team, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "We've officially signed the Harrington Group Waterfront Development Project," he announced. "Contract value, $50 million. A buzz of energy spread through the office. This project, a highly anticipated development on Boston's waterfront, was one of the most sought-after deals in the industry. The fact that Ethan's newly founded company had secured it over more established firms sent a clear message: Ethan Caldwell Associates wasn't just another startup. It was a force to be reckoned with. And it wasn't just about the deals. The company's culture was alive. The employees, many of whom had defected from Caldwell Enterprises, were thriving in their new environment. The rigid hierarchy they had once endured was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of collaboration and innovation. Young employees, once stifled under Eleanor's rule, were now leading brainstorming sessions, contributing ideas, and shaping the company's future. Industry publications took note. Reports hailed Ethan as a fresh force in real estate development, praising his leadership style and his commitment to fostering diversity. In an industry often resistant to change, he was bringing something new, something that worked. His name was spreading fast. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived in Ethan's inbox. The sender, James Caldwell. Subject: Son, I feel terrible as your father. Ethan's eyes lingered on the first line. If possible, I'd like to talk about the company, and more importantly, about family. There was no demand. No authority. Just a father reaching out, trying, perhaps for the first time, to truly mend what had been broken. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. Then, slowly, he exhaled and clicked reply. Attached to James's email was a newspaper article discussing the possibility of collaboration between Caldwell Enterprises and Ethan Caldwell Associates. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the screen for a long time. The anger that once consumed him had faded. There was no resentment left, no need for retribution. All that remained was a quiet wish to rebuild, to move forward, to mend what was broken. Finally, he typed out a short reply. Are you free Sunday afternoon? Noah wants to see you too. A simple sentence. A small step, but one that marked the beginning of something new. A chance for dialogue. A chance for healing. Outside the window, the soft winter sunlight bathed the Boston skyline in a golden glow. The city stretched beneath it, calm, steady, ready to welcome the dawn of a new era. 1 month after Thanksgiving, Boston had transformed. Christmas decorations lined the streets, twinkling against the cold December air. A crisp wind rustled through the trees, shaking strands of lights strung along Newbury Street, where holiday shoppers hurried between stores, arms full of gifts. At La Maison Dow's, the energy was even more electric than usual. Lines stretched out the door, customers eagerly waiting for our seasonal specials, Stollen, Bûche de Noël, and other holiday treats. Mom, you're in the newspaper again. Noah came racing from the back of the shop, waving a copy of the Boston Globe. The article named my bakery one of the year's most notable establishments, praising our creative take on traditional recipes and the warm, welcoming atmosphere we had cultivated. I smiled, watching Noah beam with pride. We had come so far. Across town, in the affluent neighborhood of Chestnut Hill, a moving truck pulled away from the Caldwell estate. Eleanor stood by the window, watching as the last of her belongings were loaded. With her resignation as CEO and her complete exile from Boston's high society, she could no longer afford the mansion she had once ruled over. Her so-called friends had vanished overnight. The people who once clamored for her attention now acted as if she no longer existed. Her new home was a modest apartment in Back Bay, a far cry from the lavish world she once inhabited. Most of her designer furniture had been sold off, leaving only a handful of personal keepsakes. Through the window, she gazed at the city, the towering skyline that had once been hers to control. But now, it felt impossibly far away. At Caldwell Enterprises, change was in motion. Under James's direct leadership, corporate culture was shifting. The discriminatory policies that had once governed the company were gone, replaced with a fair and transparent evaluation system, one that valued talent, diversity, and hard work over privilege and connections. Then, one day, James made a bold proposal. I'd like to consider a merger between our companies, he told Ethan. The news sent ripples through the industry. Father and son, once divided, now joining forces to build something new. More than just a business deal, it was a symbol of reconciliation. A commitment to learning from the past and shaping the future together. The name of the new company said it all. Caldwell and Caldwell Associates. On Sunday morning, we sat around the table, enjoying brunch as a family. Noah, bubbling with excitement, chatted away with James about baking, his eyes bright, his laughter filling the room. Next, I'm going to make a cake for Grandpa, he announced. James blinked rapidly, his throat tightening. The boy who had once been humiliated at his family's table now sat here, smiling, whole, happy. And for the first time in a long time, so did we. Ethan and I had emerged from this storm stronger than before. Watching him navigate this crisis with both determination and compassion had deepened my love for him in ways I hadn't expected. The ordeal that could have torn us apart had, instead, made us unshakable. But sometimes, when the nights were quiet, I thought about Eleanor. Alone in her Back Bay apartment. They say she spends the holidays by the window, watching families pass by on the street below, an expensive wine glass in her hand. She sits in the glow of Christmas lights, lost in thought, reflecting on a life that once seemed untouchable. Everything had changed. The past had crumbled. And something new, something better, was just beginning.